Hi there, I'm Watchin, founder and CEO of I Choose the Ladder, and I want to welcome you to the C-Suite Cheat Code, a show where we pull the curtain back on the unwritten rules of corporate America and give out the cheat codes to reconstructing the corporate ladder. First item on our meeting agenda, CEOs are human too. We'll discuss the ways to bridge the gap between senior leadership and lower level talent. Next, we'll head on over to my favorite place in the world, the internet, where I will share my favorite post of the week. Then we will head on over to the cheat code for a conversation with Terrie Sterling, the interim CEO at University Medical Center, New Orleans. Before we end our meeting, we will head on over to the hot seat where I will answer your questions. Today, we're talking about being a natural leader and professional attire. Clearly, we have a lot to talk about today, so let's get to it. Corporate CEOs are typically under a microscope because of their high salaries and their perceived power. Everyone seems to have an opinion on what CEOs should and should not be doing. And sometimes I think we forget that they're human too, right? But even worse, sometimes I think they might forget that they are also human and they need to connect with their teams. And so, in case you missed it, there was an article that came out about the friction that sometimes exists between the top leaders of an organization and then the people who are actually in the trenches doing the work. And that gap often leads to mistrust if there's not communication, and morale being low if people feel like they don't understand the direction. The CEO is so far away from them that they can't necessarily get a grasp of who they are as people, if they should trust them. And if there's uncertainty around where the direction of the company is going, you tend to get high turnover. And so what can we do about that? One of the things that I read that I thought was really interesting. We hear about gaslighting in relationships, but it was to avoid organizational gaslighting, right? Because it causes confusions in your employees. So what that means is make sure that the values that you as a CEO or a senior leader are saying is important to the organization, you're actually living those things day to day in the walls of your organization. So if you say that you prioritize the people above profits, make sure that you're not running your employees into the ground for the sake of profits, because that obviously is in conflict. The second thing is you want to remember that trust is the foundation of all healthy relationships, and you earn trust or lose trust based on your actions and not your title. And so if you are trying to get the trust of the people who you have been asked to lead, it's important that they feel like you are someone who embodies the values and the direction that they also are agreeing to embody and the direction that they're choosing to follow. The third part, and I know that this is hard because senior leaders are typically under a lot of pressure, but you want to show your human side, right? Because if you want people to understand, although they understand intellectually, but emotionally, if you want people to understand that you are human as well, you want to make sure that you're showing your human side, and so that they don't view you as some figurehead who's just there collecting a high salary and not really understanding what's going on or what's expected of them or the things that they're dealing with. And then the last tip is to talk to your employees and not at them, right? Oftentimes, the messaging that comes down, it's at a meeting or some all hands where you stand up in front of people and then you tell them what they're supposed to be doing. And then there are middle managers who kind of carry out that work. But if you want to connect with the people, finding other organic ways to talk to your teams, not just your direct report, but to talk to the people within the organization, can do a lot to humanize you with your employees. Next up, we head to my favorite place in the world, the internet. And today's post is around being your authentic self. So you've heard the narrative about, employers wanting people to bring their whole selves to work. And this post had me cracking up. So if you haven't seen it, it's a picture of a Black woman. She's sitting on her couch with her bonnet on, with her glass of wine. Kind of looks like me on a Saturday night. And then there's another picture of a woman in some corporate professional attire. And the woman in the professional attire says to the woman on the couch, they said you could come too. And the authentic self says, nah, I'm good. And that speaks to some of what the employees of color deal with when deciding how to show up in the workplace. And so if you are someone who is not a person of color, it is helpful to try to understand what your employees have to deal with before they walk into the walls of your organization that you may not, and thinking through how you can create environments where they feel like they can bring the woman in the bonnet with the wine to work. actually, not literally, obviously, but if they can bring that part of themselves to work, because if you get whole people at work, you get better outputs from your employees. Now we are going to head to our cheat code, where I'm speaking with Terrie Sterling, and I am beyond excited for you all to hear her talk. She's gone through so many things professionally, and so make sure you have your I Choose the Ladder notebook, a pen, and your favorite beverage, and get ready to get these gems.
So Terrie, we're going to talk about your really big job and the work that you do, especially during a global pandemic. But I'm thinking back, how did corporate America, or the concept of corporate, get introduced to your life? Was it something that you always knew existed, that you would be a part of eventually, or how did it enter your life?
Well, being a nurse by foundational training, it's not something that I can say that I thought about when I chose nursing as a career, but very interesting. Early on in my career, I remember coming home from work and my dad asking, about 6 months in, what did I think about nursing? And one of the things I talked to him about is there wasn't this sense of controlling our own destiny and how we made decisions, and even how the nurses on the unit could take ownership of the things that we could. That kind of parlayed down the line to an opportunity to go back to business school. And so I became a nurse manager, and then had the opportunity to be sponsored by my organization to get my MBA. And that's really where I fell in love with the idea of corporate leadership, studying everybody, from Jack Welch and others who ran, the GEs of the world, and that corporate culture. That's really where I fell in love with corporate leadership, and then began to think about, one day wanting to be in a senior level role in, a large organization.
So you just mentioned that your company actually sponsored you to go back to school. And we talk about, sponsorship a ton, right? We hear coming through the ranks about mentorship a lot. We don't necessarily talk about sponsorship and what it takes and what it means to have a company sponsor you. So looking back at that time, like, why do you think they were open to sponsoring you to pursue something that could have potentially taken you away from them? If they'd been thinking, right, you get your MBA and then you go somewhere else. But what do you think it was, maybe about your performance or about just like your role within the organization, that made them open to that sponsorship?
Well, you talk about the important role of mentors. It was really a unique opportunity. Our chief nursing officer at the time was, her husband was the dean of the School of Business at LSU. And so they were starting a new executive program, and they were looking for partnering with corporate entities to identify up and coming leaders to invest in, to sponsor. And so it was really a unique opportunity. I tell people all the time, sometimes a little luck happens along the way that opens a door. And I had become an assistant director, was working with quality and with some of the regulatory pieces. And because of that work and closely working with her on some projects, she suggested that I potentially be the candidate. I had a little luck on the other side as well. Our CEO happened to serve on jury duty with my dad. And so, I went from being kind of a nameless, faceless person to, you should find my daughter. Certainly, my late father was one of my biggest cheerleaders. So I had a little luck on both sides that, she suggested, and he's like, oh yeah, I met her dad on jury duty. And so those things kind of really came together to make that very unique opportunity. And both of them actually were great mentors and great advocates for me my entire career.
So let's think about the educational piece for a little bit, because it is a huge investment, right? Whether you get it sponsored and your company's paying for it or not, the time investment, right? As you are, figuring out all the other parts of life. So for you, looking back now, what maybe are some of the benefits of having gone back, and maybe some of the challenges that you didn't necessarily see would come? I know I get questions a lot from women in the community around, is it worth it to go back and get an MBA? Are you actually using the things? And so as you think about the value that your MBA provided or didn't provide, how has it materialized in your profession?
In the world of business, I will say that I do not believe that many of the opportunities that I was afforded would have occurred had I not gone to business school. Nursing is one of the largest cost centers in healthcare, in hospitals. and learning to understand how you control the cost, how you manage that cost. And so while I was in school, then working on my MBA, I was afforded the opportunity to lead the Office of Budget and Finance for the Division of Nursing. And that afforded me the opportunity to be in front of the C-suite in support of my executive at the time, annually producing our budget, discussing any budget variance, discussing any plans we had. And so for me, it really was my entree into the C-suite for them to, again, for me to be visible and a part of solving problems. And I think that's one of the things that's really important when individuals think about, is an MBA worth it? It's not necessarily all of what it's worth to your company. It's about what it deepens in your understanding of the business environment that you're going to have to work in. And so I would tell anyone who's considering it that it's certainly worth it. Now, I will say, excuse me, that there is a cost. You know, I was a mom, a wife, and, you know, all of those roles that we play. And so as I made different decisions about school and commitments, it's decisions that my husband and I made together. I didn't take a job. I didn't go to school. I didn't do anything without he and I sitting together and having a conversation about what it meant to our family, what it meant to our time commitment. I will also say, you know, when your children are younger, I went back to graduate school twice. Once when my daughter was between 2 and 5, and then once when she was in high school. And it was much harder when she was in high school. And I thought it was actually going to be easier, but I could trust her with my husband or with my mother or with my mother-in-law when she was a baby and know that she was loved, fed, and well taken care of. When she was older and I missed a basketball game, it was a big deal. And so there are those pieces that you have to, you know, think about when you're choosing to, you know, pursue your education. But I think it's about really having a good partner with you and really working with your family to understand how do you don't have a village, how do you build a village? How do you pay for a village when you need it? But I think it's really, really important. No one can take away from you what you learn yourself and the skills and the things that you develop. You will carry them with you forever. And so I just believe in lifelong learning.
And you talked about while you were in school, you took on a new high profile role within your organization. I think that a lot of times there is fear around that because when you are maybe one of the few Black people, or maybe you're the only Black woman, your mistakes in high profile roles, like they are highly visible to everyone. And so there's a bit of fear around maybe rocking the boat too much so that you are not like, there's not a target on your back. But for you, how did you think about making mistakes? And even now as a very senior leader, the epitome of a senior leader, how do you think about making mistakes in your lifelong learning? Because learning comes with mistakes because you don't know. And so how do you think about about mistakes? And then for someone who may be feeling like they don't want to pursue something because they just don't want the added pressure, but it probably is good for their career, how should they be thinking about it?
Well, I'll take the latter first. Is I think don't say no to yourself. You know, when individuals reach out to me I had a young woman reach out to me. She was considering going to one of the top 10 business schools in healthcare, and she didn't feel the time was right. And there was all of these reasons she was giving me, and, you know, that someone had handed her me to talk through. And I said, so you're going to say no to yourself before you allow them to even look at your resume.
We do that all the time, though.
Yes. And so it's really not saying I'm not going to say no to myself. You know, the other thing I used to tell my female executives when, you know, in my role, I used to always tell them, okay, I'm taking off my Terrie boss hat and I'm putting on my Terrie female coach mentor hat. And when talking to them about whether it's getting a certification or joining a, applying to being a part of something. And I said, you're not going to glow in the dark. Nobody's going to know if you don't get in. You know, I said, but when you say no to yourself, then you're not giving yourself that opportunity. And, self-esteem is I like to think of it's kind of like porridge. if you have a little too much, it's arrogance. And if you don't have enough, you have missed opportunities. It's the esteem of yourself to really focus on accomplishing what you are, and to know, even if you do make a mistake, you can pick yourself up, you can move in the right direction, and you can recover from that. We sometimes think that there are fatal errors. There are very few fatal errors. And most people can tell stories about, something that, oh my God, they screwed up, or, and you learn from those things. It's how you learn. So I just remind young people, just pick yourself back up, but push yourself forward. We're in a unique situation. Vice President Harris made the comment about she's going to be the first, but not the last. We have to think that way. When we are opening a door for someone, or when we push through a door, we get to bring somebody with us. But if we never get in that room, we can't bring others along.
Oh, this has been so great. If people want to find you, where can they find you?
TerrieSterling.com.
Perfect.
And now for our hot seat, our employee question for today. I am a natural leader, so I'd always volunteer to lead things. Now my manager asks me to lead our team for a few initiatives and projects. I'm starting to get frustrated because there is no end in sight and there is a lot of added responsibility. I asked for a raise but was denied. Should I stop volunteering to take the lead on things, or turn it down when my manager requests I take the lead? So this is a really good question, because the advice is always raise your hand, do the work, and you have to be doing the work before you actually get the title. If you are taking on new projects, right, you should have a conversation with your manager about why you're taking on these projects and what you are hoping that having done these things and done them well will achieve for you professionally, right? So make sure that both of you are clear on the expectations, you understand what the desired outcomes are, and she can let you know if they are realistic or not. But to just stop without conversation, I don't think will bode well for either of you. So I would say have a conversation with your manager about why you're taking on these things, what you are hoping to accomplish, and see what advice she gives you. But if the answer to your raise was no, you should have perfected the follow-up question, which we've talked about. So the follow-up question would be, what would I need to demonstrate in order to be eligible for a raise the next time that raises are being given out? But have a conversation with your manager and make sure that you are both clear on expectations. Today's manager question: I feel everyone is sensitive about what professional attire is, but maybe I'm wrong. At the company I work for, we're required to dress in business attire. I understand that means different things to different cultures and people. I don't want to set a strict standard for business attire, but I think some of the clothing expressions some of my employees make technically fall under business attire, but visually don't match with the rest of the office. For example, yellow or red pantsuits and things along those lines. Is it appropriate for me to mention this to them? So my first question would be, is their attire preventing them from being able to do their job well? Or is it that you have a personal preference on what you would like people to see? So if the answer to the first part of it is yes, it is a distraction. It is causing them to not be able to do their work well. It's causing them to not be able to deliver on the requirements of their job. Then I would say have a conversation, and not about their attire, but about the impact that the attire is having on their work. The second part of this is, if it's just your preference, that's something that you have to adjust, right? Like maybe your understanding of what business is has changed depending on when you entered the workforce, or based on maybe the industry standards, but things are changing, right? People are changing. And there are some phenomenal colored suits that I've seen that I would wear and consider professional. So if it's just your personal preference, that's something that you're going to have to work through and you're going to have to work on, and, thinking through how you can adjust with how work is adjusting. But if you feel like their clothing is somehow, right, in which I don't see how, but maybe, I don't know the inner workings of your organization, but if you feel like their clothing is preventing them from doing their job and executing on the responsibilities of their job, then absolutely I would say something, because as managers, we want to be able to set our employees up for success. And if you feel like their clothing is preventing them from that, I would say have the conversation. All right, so that's our show for today, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time to tune in. But really quickly before I head out, I want to leave you all with a career affirmation to help you get through the week. And you know that I always use our I Choose the Ladder career affirmation cards. If you don't have a set, make sure you head on over to choosetheladder.com to grab a deck. But let me see what the message is for today. And you all know if it's a card that I don't like, going on to the next one. Ooh, the opinion of others do not determine my worth. The opinions of others do not determine my worth. I could dig it. Now, you all know that I love to keep the conversation going. So as usual, you can connect with me on Instagram at ICUWatching or with the company at I Choose the Ladder. And until next time, thank you for watching. Meeting adjourned.